Dear little one. An open letter to younger self. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. The breaking point comes not in a single moment, but in the slow creep of words that never made it to the page. Words too dense to speak, too fragile to hold, suspended in the spaces where thoughts scatter like dust. These words weren't forgotten. They calcified in something unspoken, becoming sediment layered deep beneath thought, compacted over time into weight you never noticed until it began to crack. They pressed against the mind, like a hum that never fades, a resonance that vibrates through the walls of your consciousness, unsettling the foundation, hinting at fractures you can't yet see. They weren't just words left unsaid. They were specters threading through the fabric of thought, invisible scaffolding holding up the silence you've inhabited for so long. Each wall, each barrier, wasn't built deliberately but shaped itself from everything withheld. An architecture of omission, solid yet intangible. The silence didn't just grow, it fused with you, became part of your form, until the weight of what was never spoken pressed against every breath, distorting the air, bending the very shape of your existence. Now, as the fractures spread, the words claw their way back to the surface, not to be spoken, but to be felt in their raw, jagged edges, demanding space in a world they've been denied for too long. They drift through the folds of memory like ash caught in a dying light, shifting between presence and absence, always on the edge of becoming. Trapped beneath breath, they wait, not patiently, but insistently. A force pressing outward from within, warping the air, bending time. It isn't the lack of words that breaks you. It's their weight, the gravity of what remains unsaid, pulling everything inward until even silence feels sharp enough to cut. Sleeplessness wraps itself around you like a second skin, pulling tighter with each passing hour. The weight of it presses against your chest, a tension that hums beneath the surface, not loud, but persistent, like ink pooling on unwritten letters. You feel it in your hands, the twitch of fingers aching to write something, anything. But the words remain stuck, lodged in a space between thought and action. They gather like dust on forgotten pages, unmoved, unwritten, yet heavy with the weight of their absence. There is a letter waiting to be born, but it fractures before it can form, a tangle of sentences that splinter as soon as they surface. You don't know who it's for, or maybe you do, and that's what makes it unbearable. The ink isn't just in the pen, it's in your breath, clinging to your thoughts like smoke from a fire long extinguished, staining everything it touches. It coils beneath your skin, pressing outward like words caught between the teeth, aching to escape but never finding form. You sit at the desk, staring at the blank paper. The pen rests in your hand, heavy as stone, and the words swirl in the air, shapeless and elusive. The paper isn't empty, it's weighed down with possibilities, each one curling at the edges, burning away before you can grasp it. Your thoughts scratch at the surface of silence, like claws dragging across glass, desperate to carve meaning into something blank. But the surface never yields. The paper resists, unmarked, defiant. Every breath tightens, each inhale caught between the tick and the tock, as if time itself is splintering in your chest. The clock's rhythm doesn't mark progress. It marks absence, each second a hollow frame, holding the outline of words that never took shape, stretching endlessly through time, fragile and weightless, yet pressing down like an unseen tide, invisible but rising, pooling in forgotten spaces of the mind, settling deeper with each moment, like sediment layering the bottom of a still dark pool, unseen yet ever present. The air thickens with the weight of those seconds, stretching until time feels like a thread pulled too thin, fraying at the edges, threatening to snap. The tick-tock echoes through the room, a pulse that binds you to the moment, anchoring you in the silence between breaths, the place where words are meant to form but dissolve instead. The weight thickens with each passing second. It presses against your chest, coils around your wrists, until writing feels like chiseling stone in the dark, an act that scrapes at your core, each stroke carving into something brittle and unseen. But the letter is more than just ink and paper. It is a form of reckoning, a fragile vessel that holds the gravity of all the unspoken moments that have calcified in silence, layered like sediment in the corners of your mind. You can't look at it without feeling that weight pressing down, tightening your chest, making every breath feel like a thread stretched to its limit. You don't know what words will form, or if they ever will. The paper remains blank, a mirror of everything you've tried to bury. The clock ticks on, no longer marking time but carving it into jagged pieces, each tick falling like a pebble into water. Ripples spreading out, endless, distorting the air, folding moments into themselves. You sit at the desk, staring at the blank paper. Still the clock ticks on. The air grows denser, the weight pressing against your mind until every breath feels like a battle against gravity. Time bends, warps, coils around your thoughts like a serpent. The silence between each tick stretches out endlessly, filling with the weight of things you've never allowed yourself to feel. The sound stretches beyond the room, like footsteps on a path that never ends, pressing into the mind, making each second feel heavier than the last. The sound is no longer a steady pulse. It's fragmented, warped, stretching and collapsing like elastic fraying at the edges. Each tick marks a space where words should have been. The silence doesn't just stretch, it pulls tighter, slicing through thought, digging trenches in the mind, until all you hear is that relentless tick-tock. Each second feels heavier, like a stone dropping into a well with no bottom, echoing endlessly into a darkness that refuses to release its depth. And then the ink begins to spill, not in a neat flow, but in jagged bursts, leaking from the corners of thoughts that have been contained for too long. The ink isn't just ink, it's the residue of everything you've swallowed, every word you've never said. It stains your thoughts, pressing against your breath, curling around your ribs like vines that have been growing in secret, slowly tightening with time. The words are no longer quiet. They scrape at the inside of your chest, clawing their way up, demanding to be heard. But your hands tremble. The pen feels foreign, heavy, like a tool you no longer know how to wield. The page waits, unmoved by the chaos inside you. The act of writing feels impossible, like chiseling meaning from stone with bare hands, each stroke crumbling before it takes form. The ink pools, heavy and dark. The paper waits. In that stillness, the fracture deepens, widening through your core, exposing everything you've buried, like ink seeping into unseen cracks. Each attempt to form a sentence falls apart before it reaches the surface, disintegrating into fragments that hover just beyond your reach. The breaking point isn't sudden. It's been building for years, each unspoken word sinking like stones into the earth, creating unseen pressures. The walls you've constructed begin to bow and shift, straining under the weight of silence. Questions left unanswered press against the seams, their tensions stretching like roots searching for fractures. And now those pressures have surfaced, bowing beams, twisting foundations, until the entire structure groans, fragile and ready to give way. And then you realize, it's not just sleeplessness that weighs on you. It's the gravity of everything you've never said, pressing into your bones, shaping you in ways you never noticed. The questions are no longer separate from you. They are woven into the fabric of your being, pressing against the shape of who you thought you were, distorting the outline until you can't tell where they end and you begin. The letter isn't just a letter. It's a fracture in time, a crack in the foundation of yourself, a demand for release. You stare at this version of yourself, fractured, unfamiliar, unrecognizable. It isn't absence that lingers in the air. It's everything you've avoided, everything you've buried in silence, pressing outward, demanding to be heard. And now, the breaking point is here, not loud, not violent, but inevitable. It hits without warning, like lightning striking from a cloudless sky. One moment you are awake, burdened by the weight of what remains unsaid. And the next, you are pulled under. A sudden, unrelenting fall into darkness. It feels less like sleep and more like surrender, as though some unseen hand has pressed you into the void, demanding stillness. In the dream, the world is submerged. Water rises around you, warm and endless, swallowing the air. It isn't drowning, it's a baptism, but one that washes away more than just sins. The water cleanses the weight of unspoken words, peeling back layers of silence until only raw, unformed thought remains. The immersion strips you bare, but not gently. It carves away what you've been holding on to, leaving you weightless, suspended in something both soothing and terrifying. You remember your first baptism, a scene blurred at the edges, as if the memory itself had been washed too many times, losing its clarity with each rinse. Father Walter Geri, the Italian priest with hands too soft and eyes too stern, moved with precision, his fingers tracing the ritual as if the act itself carried more weight than the person being baptized. His hand touched your forehead, cool water trickling down in threads, as if to wipe away something unseen, something that could never be fully cleansed. Your grandmother stood behind you, her rosary beads clicking softly, each sound like a whisper in a foreign tongue. Her belief ran deeper than words. It was carved into her gestures, her silences, the way she moved through life with a certainty that left no room for questioning. You enjoyed the way she performed for all eyes to see, the rhythmic halts in her prayer chants, the exaggerated bows and flourishes that turned each prayer into a theatrical production, as though each word demanded a personal audience with the heavens, bowing and kneeling at precisely the right moments, as though she were directing some unseen choir of saints. As if time itself had to stop and take note of her devotion. It was a spectacle, a one-woman show in the theater of faith, complete with bows and kneeling like a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra. Each chant punctuated with dramatic pauses, as though heaven itself needed time to take note of her devotion. And you played and danced along, knowing exactly where to bow and when to cross the stage. But deep inside, you vowed never to perform like that through your own life. You knew the cost of living on a stage, the exhaustion of maintaining a script, the weariness of applause that never feels quite real. It wasn't just faith. It was survival, a way of holding on to something solid in a world that often shifted beneath her feet. And you, standing there, were another piece of that certainty. Her living proof that rituals, even the performed ones, held the power to shape reality. You were her legacy, her proof that the rituals mattered, that the past could be rewritten through the proper rites. Her hands shaped more than prayer. They shaped you, molded you into the image of what she believed a cleansed soul should be, even if it meant erasing the parts of you she couldn't understand. She believed in this moment, in the sanctity of it. Your godfather, too, stood steady beside you, a man of presence, yet in the photograph, his body becomes a barrier, obscuring you entirely. The image captured is not of you being cleansed, but of a scene in which you are hidden, your face lost behind the outlines of others. The figure, not a person, but an obstruction, a fragment of presence that blurred clarity, a trace cast by light you didn't know was there, who blocked you from the camera's gaze, whether intentional or accidental, became the symbolic figure of your obscurity. Even in the sacred act, you were unseen, a ghost within your own story. The photo tells a story of faith, but it also speaks of erasure, of how rituals meant to anchor identity can instead dissolve it, like ink smearing on damp paper. It is a snapshot of presence overshadowed by absence, of existence slipping into obscurity under the weight of tradition. It was the moment you became Gabriel, a name handed down by an uncle, successfully erasing Livin, as though wiping away the name could strip away something essential, something original. And yet, ironically, Ndayishimiye remained, your mother's name, offered like a quiet gift, something she couldn't keep but chose to pass down as if to say, remember where you come from. But even that gesture, that tether to lineage was obscured by ritual. The ceremony was never about you. It was about the act itself, the choreography of faith. It served your grandmother well, you see. I was cleansed of the sin of origin, a child born in sin. It served her so well, so thoroughly, that society gathered to celebrate your cleansing. They rejoiced in your absolution, in the washing away of what had stained me before I could even speak. And now, in hindsight, I see just how well it served her purposes, her hands guiding me into a future I hadn't chosen, her voice quiet yet firm, insisting that this was what must be done. I remember the feel of water on your skin, cold against the warmth of her belief, the sensation lingering long after the ritual ended. It wasn't about faith, it was about control, a way to carve out a narrative that suited her world, one where the past could be washed away with ceremony, even if the stains remained beneath. So well that when Elvin was born, she couldn't accept him as he was. No matter how I pleaded with her, to her, Elvin too was born of sin, and so she forced you to bring him to the altar, to push him down for another cleansing. The only difference this time? The priest was not white. Father David from Zambia stood in place of Father Gary. The water was the same, the ritual unchanged, but the hands that marked Elvin's forehead weren't the same hands that once marked yours. And yet the act carried the same weight, the same erasure, the same rewriting of something that was never broken to begin with. But the universe has a way of taking care of its own. It cuts through the bullshit, sees through the human hypocrisy, and jumps in to take care of you when you least expect it. It doesn't need priests or rituals. It doesn't require rosaries or holy water. It moves quietly, invisibly, weaving through the cracks of human tradition, uprooting the lies that have been planted too deep. And while your grandmother celebrated your supposed cleansing, while she clung to the comfort of ritual and belief, the universe saw what was true. It saw the erasure. It saw the names that were given and the ones that were taken away. It saw Gabriel handed down like a second-hand coat, and it saw Livin erased, scrubbed from existence as if that would make you whole. It saw Ndayishimiye, your mother's name, her gift to me, carried through despite the rituals that tried to overwrite it. But that gift was like ink spilled on fabric, soaking in deeply, darkening everything it touched. I didn't wear it with pride. It was a name that trailed behind me like the scent of rain on parched earth. Faint, distant, yet impossible to forget. It whispered of roots stretching into soil I'd long tried to bury, roots I feared would tangle around your ankles and pull me down. The universe saw through your attempts to erase it. It held on to what mattered, even when I couldn't, even when I tried to wash it away. Some things stain forever, not to mark sin, but to remind you of what is real, what endures. And it sees Elvin, too. It sees him for who he is, untouched by rituals, unbroken by tradition. It knows that no amount of water, no priest, white or black, can change what is already true. Elvin was never born in sin. He was born in light. The universe doesn't demand absolution. It offers clarity. In the end, it's not the rituals that define us. It's what remains after the water has dried, after the rosaries have stopped clicking, after the prayers have faded into silence. It's what the universe refuses to let go of. The pieces of ourselves that were never meant to be erased. The names that linger even after everything else has been washed away. And the photo, the only evidence of the ritual, captured none of you. Your face was hidden, blocked by those who stood at the altar, their bodies eclipsing yours. Even in that moment of supposed rebirth, you remained unseen, a blurred figure in the background of your own narrative. The photograph holds more than an image. It holds absence. It holds the irony of a ritual meant to illuminate. But instead, it casts shadows. A reminder that identity is often shaped by what is obscured. Now, in this dream of water and cleansing, you feel that erasure peeling away, not gently, but with force. The water presses against your skin, not to drown, but to reshape, to reveal the pieces you've carried in silence. The dream isn't a baptism. It's a reckoning, an immersion that demands you confront what was taken, what was hidden, what remains yours. The baptism in the dream isn't gentle. It's not a sprinkling of water, but a plunge, an immersion into something primal, something ancient. The water churns around you, dark and endless, pulling you deeper. It's a reckoning, a moment of confronting the parts of yourself you've hidden from view. The figures from the photograph loom at the edges of your vision, distorted, wavering. The sinner blocking your face shifts, becoming indistinct, blending into the water until you realize the figure has always been a part of you. And when you emerge, gasping for breath, it is as if the ink from your unwritten letters has stained the water, swirling in jagged lines. The water no longer carries reflections. It bears imprints of every word you swallowed, letters unraveling and twisting in the current. The cleansing isn't about purity, it's about exposure, an unmasking of the self, layer by layer, until nothing is left hidden. The letter waits no longer. It splinters into the air, raw and serrated, tearing through the quiet as if the silence itself must bleed to make space for the truth. Even in that sacred moment of ritual, your identity slipped into the margins, obscured by the weight of others' expectations. The water didn't just wash over you, it diluted you, thinning your presence until you were more absence than form. And now, in this dream of submersion, you feel the boundaries dissolve, not gently, but as if something has clawed its way through the surface. The water presses harder, not to drown, but to reshape, scraping at the edges of everything you've tried to hold together. You remember your baptism, but it arrives in fragments, moments smudged and worn, distorted like faces seen through rippling glass. Father Walter Gary's hand moved with precision, his gesture precise yet distant, like someone arranging objects on a shelf. The water touched your skin, cold and thin, but it didn't sink in. It skimmed the surface, leaving something untouched beneath. And as the rosary beads clicked behind you, the photograph was taken, but it captured nothing of you. The image was complete without your face, your identity erased by the bodies crowding the altar, their presence more solid than your own. And now, as the dream bends and twists, you feel that weight lifting, not gently, but torn away, as if the water itself had claws. The heaviness of the dream lingers, even as you open your eyes, the clarity of waking life sharp but disorienting, like stepping into a world that hasn't yet caught its breath. The air feels lighter, but the remnants of the dream press against your skin, reminding you that the boundary between what is imagined and what is real isn't as solid as it seems. The light filters in, familiar and unchanged, but your reflection in it feels altered, reshaped by something that refuses to dissolve with the dawn. The baptism in your dream isn't a sprinkling of grace. It's a collision with something primal, an upheaval that churns the depths of your mind. You are submerged, not cleansed, and the water pulls at the edges of your thoughts, peeling away everything hidden beneath polished surfaces. It strips away the layers of silence, carving through memory like a blade. You see fragments of the past dislodge and drift, words never spoken, names that cling like vines, rituals that sought to redefine you. But what emerges isn't chaos, it's clarity, sharp and unwavering. The truths that surface are the ones that endured, names you couldn't shed, moments that resisted erasure. The lies crumble, delicate as ash, revealing what was always there, the core of who you are, unshaken by ceremony and untouched by the hands that tried to rewrite you. The water presses harder, relentless, as if it knows the weight of what you've been carrying. It scrapes away the masks, pulling you down to the raw core of yourself, where names are not inherited but fought for. The letter is no longer waiting. It rises from the depths, etched in lines of jagged ink that twist and unravel, carving their presence into the air as though silence must be shattered for truth to breathe. The ink doesn't flow, it pierces. Each word is a cut, each line a crack in the surface of everything you thought could be buried. And then you see it. The dream isn't about rebirth. It's about excavation. It's not a ritual of absolution. It's a confrontation with all that was erased, all that was obscured, the lies that clung like fog, distorting the outline of what was always there. It's a peeling back, a carving through, revealing the truths that were never lost, only buried under layers of silence and expectation. The water doesn't baptize, it reveals. It churns up the sediment of memory, bringing to light the pieces of yourself that were never meant to be forgotten. The letter unfurls, raw and serrated, refusing to be silenced any longer, pressing through the quiet like a jagged breath, carving itself into existence. This is not a rebirth. It is a return, a collapse inward, where the weight of all that's been buried surges to the surface. It is the breath held for too long, finally released, carrying with it the residue of names that never fit and rituals that sought to sand down your edges. The universe doesn't forget what matters. It doesn't need human interventions to carve truth from silence. It waits in the quiet spaces, pressing light through the smallest fractures, refusing to let you vanish beneath the stories others wrote in your place. It doesn't ask for priests or prayers. It doesn't concern itself with absolution. It watches as each crack widens, splitting through the layers you've worn, pressing through the brittle shell of identity you inherited. And when the cracks reach their breaking point, it doesn't mend them. It opens them wider, forcing you to see what you tried to hide. There is no mercy in its revelation, only clarity. It sees the names you shed, the fragments you abandoned, and it lifts them into view, not to haunt, but to remind. What was erased still lingers, not as a ghost, but as a pulse beneath the surface, insistent and unyielding. This is not a cleansing. It's a rupture. The light pressed into the cracks isn't gentle. It carves through the dark spaces with precision, illuminating everything you tried to forget, everything you weren't ready to face. But it's there now, undeniable, raw, and whole. The universe doesn't let go of what is real. It presses through the fractures, spilling light into the gaps, illuminating what you've buried. It doesn't let you remain unseen. And in the soft haze of waking, there is no grand revelation, only the steady unraveling of what you already knew. The truth isn't a light breaking through darkness. It is a presence that never left, a pulse beneath the surface, slow but constant. Lies are delicate things. They fray at the edges, unraveling without ceremony, dissolving like the remnants of old conversations you can't quite recall. They linger as murmurs, words half heard through closed doors, fading into silence before meaning can be grasped. It's in those fading echoes that you realize it wasn't the lies themselves that stayed with you, but the spaces they left behind, the hollow imprints of truths avoided. The world doesn't shatter, it adjusts. The clarity comes not with force, but with a quiet inevitability. It presses into the spaces where silence once ruled, seeping through cracks, settling into the hollows. The lies fade like vapor in dawn's first breath, and what remains is neither harsh nor gentle. It simply is. What remains is the name you've always carried, the pieces of yourself that never needed validation, the quiet truths that have stood steady through every attempt to bury them. It is the weight of what has endured, the roots too deep to be cut, the fragments too stubborn to be erased. And it asks nothing of you but recognition, a moment of stillness to see what has always been there, waiting. The truth, persistent and whole, waits for no permission to exist. It doesn't ask to be accepted. It waits, still, steady, a reflection in water, daring you to look closer and see it for what it has always been. But can you? Can anyone truly confront the truths they've buried? Or do we spend our lives peering at distorted reflections, hoping the ripples will settle before the lies we tell ourselves fade into nothingness?